Rockford leaders and community members join many people around the globe in mourning the passing of Reverend Jesse Jackson. Alyssa Kelly meets with two Rockford community advocates who say Jackson left a profound impact on their lives.
Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive.
Globally and locally, community members want to keep hope alive following the death of late Reverend Jesse Jackson. 84-year-old Jackson's family says he died peacefully on Tuesday morning, surrounded by loved ones.
And I was just overcome with grief, as if I was just a member of his family, because that's the way I felt about it.
Rockford community member Diana Walker says she is blessed to have worked on both of Jesse Jackson's presidential campaigns.
He treated everybody like you were somebody.
And blessed to be in the age group that worked with him in the civil rights movement.
That's a blessing for me to have known him.
Walker not only admired his status as a prodigy alongside Martin Luther King Jr., but the fact he was always for the people.
He's always supported other people and pushed for other people forward. Even though he never achieved that highest office, he never stopped working for the people.
Local musician and founder of Sounds of Good News Productions, Carl Cole, also admired Jackson's dedication to serving the people in hopes to continue that legacy.
The thing about him is that he had the courage to move forward and upward with worthwhile goals that would help everybody.
Cole, most commonly known as Mr. C, says in honor of Jackson's legacy, the Rockford region can take on more projects and initiatives to exemplify the late Reverend.
And if we can work together and celebrate our diversity, unity in diversity, those are the kinds of things that Reverend Jesse Jackson did and Dr. King, to come together to make a better world, which starts locally.
In Rockford, Alyssa Kelly, WIFR News.
The Rainbow Push Coalition, founded by the late Reverend Jesse Jackson, says it will announce arrangements for celebrations of life services, including public events.